Is the world really sinking into chaos, hatred, and irrationality? In the midst of a global pandemic, an economic downturn, and rioting in the US, it can be more than difficult to see the longer perspective. Nonetheless, the perhaps surprising answer from cognitive psychologist Steven Pinker is no. His 2018 book Enlightenment Now is full of stats showing that while the world may be bad, it's still better than it used to be. Our lives have become longer, healthier, safer, happier, more peaceful, more stimulating, and more prosperous. Pinker's somewhat controversial claim is that it's the values of the Enlightenment, reason, science, and humanism that brought about this progress. Weighing in at 500 information-packed pages, no summary can do it justice. The book is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 tackles the concept of the Enlightenment. Here, 4 themes are prominent: reason, science, humanism, and progress. Reason is non-negotiable. If you argue against reason, you have to use reason to do it. Science is the refining of reason to understand the world. Humanism is the idea that we need a secular foundation for morality, and our moral concern should extend to individuals, not groups, as only individuals feel pleasure and pain, fulfillment and anguish. In part 2 of the book, Pinker lists a number of areas where progress have taken place and presents a wide variety of evidence. In part 3, Pinker wraps up his defense of reason, science, and humanism. Here are my main takeaways from the book. Throughout the majority of our common human history, the average age was about 35 years or less. Then, in the 19th century, things started to change. Child mortality and maternal mortality went down dramatically. Life expectancy went up. As of 2015, the average person on the planet can expect to live for 71.4 years. In Europe and the Americas, the average is even higher. No matter how old you are, you have more years ahead of you than people of your age did in earlier decades and centuries. Living longer counts as progress. Part of the reason we live longer is that we've been able to eradicate and mitigate a large number of diseases. Thus, the number of deaths from pneumonia, diarrhea, malaria, measles, and HIV/AIDS have decreased substantially over the last 20 years. Pinker identifies the main contributor to this positive development: science. Scientists help us understand how the world works, how to produce the energy we need to thrive, and they've discovered the benefits of chlorinating water, vaccines, surgery, penicillin, and many other things that improve our health. For good and bad, the average global calorie intake has increased significantly. We've used science to increase the yield of our crops and invent machines that make farming easier. Overall, this means less suffering because we have fewer famines and fewer stunted children. But it's also led to an increase in obesity in developed nations. I suppose you can say that it's better to have the option of choosing not to eat than not having the option to eat at all. Poverty has no causes, said economist Peter Bauer. Wealth has causes. If you do nothing, nothing will happen. Over the last 200 years, we've seen an impressive decrease in the percentage of people living in extreme poverty. We've gone from 90% extremely poor to just 10%. We've used science to improve material life. Think washing machines, dishwashers, vacuums, computers, etc. We've also created institutions that make exchange of goods, services, and ideas easier. And we've seen a change in values. Since the Enlightenment, commerce is no longer looked down upon to the same extent. Inequality is not the same as poverty. Poverty is indeed objectionable, but Pinker insists that inequality is not itself a component of well-being. What does he mean? Perhaps we can think of it this way. If you make only 1% of the next guy, but the next guy is Jeff Bezos, that's unequal, but it still leaves you in pretty good shape. In other words, it's morally important that each person has enough, but not important to keep up with the Joneses, or Bezos. Furthermore, global inequality has actually decreased since the 1980s, while inequality in most Western countries has increased. Pinker suggests that one possible way to reduce poverty is to introduce a universal basic income. Pinker's approach to environmental protection is called eco-modernism. Eco-modernists accept that in order for humans to thrive or escape poverty, they need energy. They believe that industrialization has, overall, been good for humanity. It fed billions, doubled lifespans, slashed extreme poverty, and made life easier. Finally, eco-modernists believe that technology allows us to do more with less and can help decrease pollution. The current main challenge? To figure out how to get the most energy with the least emission of greenhouse gases. Pinker suggests introducing a carbon tax and developing safer nuclear power plants as a way to achieve this. In this chapter, as well as in his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, Pinker presents compelling evidence that the world is indeed more peaceful than it used to be, despite an uptick in negative news reporting. We have fewer battle deaths and genocides than previously, and the last active political armed conflict in the Western Hemisphere has ended. Many civil wars have ended without fanfare after 2009. In Angola, Chad, India, Iran, Peru, and Sri Lanka. How did the Enlightenment play a role in this positive development? Pinker mentions that the Enlightenment brought denunciations of war from Pascal and Voltaire, as well as Kant in his essay Perpetual Peace. It helped advance gentle commerce and finally, as proposed by Kant in 1795, made war illegal. With the current pandemic and riots, it's difficult to believe our societies are safer than they used to be. But actually the number of homicide deaths has decreased substantially for decades. But this continually fails to make the news. Motor vehicle accident deaths dropped more than 90% over the last 100 years. Similarly, plane crashes and deaths from falls, fires, and drownings have decreased significantly. Only deaths from poison went up, meaning an increase in people dying from drug overdose. Workplace accident deaths dropped from more than 60 in 100,000 to less than 5 in 100,000 per year. Our societies have, unnoticeably, become more safe. Perhaps most surprisingly, given the media coverage, the number of terrorist attacks also decreased. We tend to forget that the rate of killing was higher in the 1970s and 1980s, when the IRA, the Basque ETA, carried out regular bombings and shootings. The number of countries with democracies is higher now than ever, even if we can think of a few recent exceptions where the trend is moving towards authoritarianism. Furthermore, human rights are better protected in most countries, and fewer countries uphold capital punishment. In 2012, the Pew Research Center probed Americans' opinions on race, gender, and sexual orientation and found an increased tolerance for respect of rights, again despite media coverage. Google searches for sexist, racist, and homophobic jokes reveal that even private prejudice is declining with time. Homosexuality is now decriminalized in more than 90% of countries around the world. Progress may be slow, but it is happening. According to Pinker, stats from the World Bank's Knowledge Index confirms a key insight of the Enlightenment. Knowledge and sound institutions lead to moral progress. Literacy is the foundation for the rest of education, and is at an all-time high. More and more people get a basic education, more people get more years in school, more females are allowed in schools even in countries where this used to be prohibited. Even the overall IQ of humanity has increased significantly, which we can see in the fact that IQ tests regularly have to be updated to accommodate this. We typically work fewer hours and spend less time on housework and less of our income on necessities, meaning that we have more to spend on everything else. We have more leisure time, and international travel has become affordable for more people. Are we happier then? Perhaps difficult to tally, but surveys designed to gauge life satisfaction actually reveal that we are indeed more satisfied with life than we used to be. Despite the many chapters on progress, Pinker believes we should indeed take real threats seriously and use reason and science to address them. But Pinker also has a warning against apocalyptic thinking, which he believes can make people terrified into numbness, inaction, and helplessness. if we believe we are doomed no matter what, why would we make efforts to improve the world for future generations? The Enlightenment is working. For 2.5 centuries, people have used knowledge to enhance human flourishing. We can build on the improvements we've already seen, create a richer world that makes it more likely that we will spend money on protecting the environment, policing gangs, and strengthening our social safety nets. Looking at data makes us realize that we've already made a lot of progress. This is not an optimistic statement, but a factual statement. However, given that what was responsible for the progress we've already seen is still here, reason, science, and humanism, it's reasonable to believe in future progress as well. Setbacks are probably inevitable, but we have a fair chance at making the future even brighter. Pinker does not refer to himself as an optimist, but his message leaves an open door for cautious optimism about the future for humans and the planet. In the third and final part of the book, Pinker defends reason, science, and humanism more thoroughly. We don't believe in reason, we use reason. Humans may well be prone to all sorts of biases, but even if it's difficult for us, we still ought to strive to be rational and build institutions that can support that rationality. There's undoubtedly a strong evolutionary selection pressure for truth and rationality. We should not, Pinker says, let the existence of cognitive and emotional biases discourage us from pursuing the Enlightenment ideal of reason, science, and truth. In other words, even if we're flawed, we can still strive to be better. Science helps us shed light on the human condition by a cycle of conjecture and refutation, as identified by Karl Popper. Pinker's point could be expressed as, science helps us discover how the world works, but we have to take responsibility for the welfare of ourselves, our species, and our planet. Pinker believes our morality must draw on simple, transparent principles that we can all agree upon. This common morality has until now eluded us, but Pinker thinks we can find such principles in the goal of maximizing human flourishing, i.e. life, health, happiness, freedom, knowledge, love, and richness of experience. These were my nonfiction takeaways from Enlightenment Now. Pinker has drawn much controversy over this book. For one thing, he's challenging the worldview we've built upon years of media consumption. Not an easy thing to give up, or even adjust. When the media is full of violence, our minds are full of violence, and past progress is quickly forgotten. In a time with an increase in violence, we can perhaps be forgiven for not focusing on the progress we've already seen, but we should not forget it either. We can learn from the progress achieved, and furthermore, remembering progress is not the same as abandoning the fight for even more progress. Pinker also challenges theistic interpretations of the world, criticizes Nietzsche, Foucault, and gender studies. Not surprising that he's met with some resistance. Whatever you think about these issues, and scholars, Enlightenment Now is a great book with loads of arguments for focusing on reason, science, humanism, and human flourishing. I highly recommend it. More nonfiction takeaways coming on this channel. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell below.